Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the eDiscovery channel. This is Tom O'Connor from, we're trying to get the houses off of people with their legs sticking out from underneath them in New Orleans. Severe tornadoes all across the state, actually. Yesterday, as a big cold front moved through with that storm system that's coming across the U.S. So it's been a crazy 24 hours here. Rachi still in Tel Aviv.
I am still hanging out over here. Looking forward to another month or so at home, which will be good before I head back U.S. side for a little bit. So
I had an enjoyable lunch with your brother and his wife, who I was just meeting for the first time. Yeah, I'd never met her before. And, yeah, we had a really nice day. It was a lovely day. The weather was warm, so we were able to sit outside in a cafe. And
that's what they said. It was a great lunch, and glad that they enjoyed the city. So it was their first time down there for vacation. So it was good.
We are really, really pleased today to have with us, as you can probably see on the screen, Judge Andrew Peck, parentheses retired, who I'm sure all of you know as Judge Andrew Peck from the Southern District of New York. Judge, thanks so much for joining us and taking time out of your schedule. I know you're probably busy as heck these days in retirement, right?
You know, the retirement line is a bit of a misnomer, as you know. I'm retired from the Southern District of New York, and it's 4.5, almost 5 years. But other than the first month after that, I've been at DLA Piper working. So
that's no way to retire.
Yeah, someone made a mistake there.
Yeah, what's wrong with this picture?
Did you check the wrong box or something when you were leaving?
Well, listen, before we talk about that, because as I said, I bet you 99% of the people who are watching here know you as Judge Peck and your career on the bench. What, 27 years?
23 years.
23 years, excuse me. But long enough so that most of the people who we've come in contact with, probably that's primarily what they knew of you was your career as a judge. But tell us, let's go to the Wayback Machine. Tell us, how did you get into this business? Where did you start, and what made you think about the law or law school? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Oh, he obviously grew up in Texas, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the accent, right?
It's the accent, exactly.
Gives it away every time.
So, I mean, I was a mystery fan and watched the old Perry Mason shows, not Raymond, Raymond Burr, etc. Growing up, and always had an interest in it. But I started at Cornell as an undergrad as a math major, computer minor, because Cornell Arts and Sciences, that was the only way to get near computer issues. Of course, that was the time where, to do anything, one typed the punch cards, and of course, I'm a terrible typist, and then batched it in at the computer center, where the computer, was a room wide, probably more, and probably had less computer power than our cell phones. Yep. At the end of sophomore year, I took the first half of a very high level math course and struggled mightily. And then maybe it was fall of that year. They didn't give the second half of the course in the spring semester. So it was fall of my junior year when I had the continuation class. And I figured, okay, the professor will, spend the first few weeks reminding us what we had supposedly learned in the first half of the course. And on day one of the class, he just started somewhere, and I was way lost already. So I went back to my room and pulled out the catalog and counted up how many classes and credits I had in my government and history courses. and went to my advisor and said, "Get me out of here.
Right. Something else, anything.
Forget this math stuff." And having done that, I knew I would go to law school, and I did.
So your interest in computers, I mean, obviously you didn't have a computer at home because this is pre-home PCs. What about it? Like, was there something that was specifically calling to you that like you just had an interest in technology? Like, why did you decide to take that as a minor?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. The memories fade. I do remember that, the other factor was was enjoying doing my assignments, but I would see my friends or others from my class in the computer center, and they were running their own programs and doing all sorts of stuff that I realized was not where I was going to go with it. So I figured it was time to abandon both
Take a little
halves.
detour. a long-term detour from there. So okay.
Now, excuse me, just a point of clarification. You mentioned growing up and watching Perry Mason. Were you in New York?
New York,
Kid?
always New York. Grew up in the Bronx.
All right.
And some people think I didn't grow up at all, but physically, in the growing up years,
you aged
in the Bronx.
Right.
Yeah.
As Jimmy Buffett says, I was growing older, but not up.
Which also explains my baseball interests, needless to say.
Lifetime Yankees fan?
All the time, always.
Yeah. What are your feelings on the new stadium? I mean, it's not so new anymore, but are you a fan or you're a diehard?
I miss the old stadium.
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain features, both for the players, which I read about, and the fans that are much nicer in the new stadium. But it is not nearly as intimate, which is sort of funny because the old stadium had a capacity of 50,000 or so, while the new stadium, they cut capacity back to 40 something.
Oh, really? Yeah. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. But it's not the real Yankee Stadium.
Right.
needs a few more World Series titles earned in this, in the new place.
Kind of the way I feel about the Boston Garden and the new TD Center or whatever they're calling it this week. It's just not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Yankee Stadium is still named Yankee Stadium. And
yes.
Not, XYZ Company Yankee Stadium.
Yeah. Wells Fargo Yankee Stadium or something. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
But
okay, so you graduate in the end with a bachelor's of arts, or what?
Yes.
Okay. Correct. With a major, what did you end up majoring in?
Government.
In government. Okay. And at what point did you decide, hey, okay, so I'm not going to do anything math wise, but maybe I should do the law? Like, where did that decision come into play?
That was sort of instantaneous, that if I wasn't going to be playing computers, I was going to go to law school and figure out my life or whatever from there.
Okay.
Lawyers in the family or an influence from the family? No.
Nope.
Cool.
Just the ghost of Perry Mason looming over your shoulder.
And did you take any time between college and law school, or hopped right in?
Straight through. Didn't have the money to, take a gap year.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, and then you, for those who don't know, you went to Duke, right, for law school. And tell us a little bit about your experiences there. Like,
I mean, I had a great time in law school. I mean, Duke is still very small, but it was even smaller in the dark ages when I was there in the mid 70s. So we had, I think we started with 200 students in my year. And within a month, we were down to 180 or something like that. And, because of that, one really could get to know the professors. And we had a mix of up and coming, soon to be stars like Walter Dellinger, who was one of the common law newbie professors, and then a lot of the old North Carolina professors, and I don't do accents well, but I still don't know, how to pronounce various legal Latin terms because I have no idea whether the professors who taught us that it's, stare decisis or, whatever in their inimicable accent were telling me the North Carolina way to pronounce it or something else.
How was the social adjustment? New York, New York City, upstate New York, Cornell, all of a sudden, boom.
Right.
The temperature was certainly a lot better, but
Yeah,
accents were very, very foreign. And indeed, I remember going to Rosh Hashanah services my first year down there, and the rabbi was speaking with a sort of rabbinical accent, which, is Midwestern or whatever. And that's, and I said, oh, how about that? And then he introduced the president of the congregation, who got up to welcome you all, and particularly with a very heavy North Carolina Southern accent. So there were certain strange things about that. But I mean, social life was mostly within the law school. So, I probably did not do as much. In Durham at that time, you didn't go downtown because there was nothing there and it wasn't safe. And I've been going back for reunions, and I've been on the board of visitors. So going back now, downtown Durham is, hopping, etc. But at that point, it was, parties at classmates' houses or whatever. And, girlfriend, which made life pleasant, who was a law student in my class. And obviously I did very well.
Yeah, that's an understatement. Again, I wasn't joking at the beginning. You did indeed graduate first in your class, correct?
I did.
And you were the editor of the law review.
Well, I was a note and comment editor, so it was not editor-in-chief or anything like that. And
then okay.
Right, so I
that
was
doesn't really count, right?
just a slacker.
You were just a total slacker, right?
But, this way back then was before the internet and all of that. We left postcards with our professors so they could mail us our end of year grade.
Wow.
Like that. And then I got a call after first year from one of my good friends and classmates who said, wow, you're number one in the class. I can't believe it. And I said, no, you must have gotten it wrong. I may have had the highest grade in con law or whatever, but not the whole first year. And she was right.
So you were number one like all 3 years you were there?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Wow.
Of course, rough. After
I'm going back on mute.
Yeah.
The first 2 years carried the third year, particularly the spring semester third year, when I took as many courses pass fail as I could so as not to screw up.
Yeah, makes sense.
So you were, like Ted Williams at the end of the season. He still went to the plate so he could hit 400, right?
The mistake I made, the copyright professor came to me, right before graduation and said, in essence, schmuck, you took my class pass fail and you got an A in it. But I couldn't give it to you because it was just pass fail.
That's fail.
What can I say?
So then you started practicing. Where did you start practicing?
Yeah.
Well, I clerked for a year in what was then the old Fifth Circuit before the Fifth Circuit split. It would have been the 11th Circuit half post split. So I was living in St. Petersburg, Florida, old age capital of Florida, particularly back then, clerking for Judge Paul Roney, and was a great, phenomenal experience. So I did that for a year. One of my co-clerks was Chuck Cooper, who you may or may not know that name because he is the name partner of Cooper and Kirk in Washington, D.C., and a very conservative judge, lawyer, sorry. In fact, the story I told at one of the reunions was we both applied for clerkships, and in those days, you could do it for the immediate next year. So while we were clerking with Judge Roney, we both applied for clerkships with Justice Rehnquist. And one of the questions that Rehnquist asked me, and therefore I assume he asked Chuck, was something like, how will your views go with mine or whatever? And I said something like, you're the justice, you've got the presidential commission, and, I haven't had any problem with Judge Roney, who was Republican appointed, but was nowhere near as conservative as Rehnquist. And I'm sure Chuck's answer to that same question was, Justice Rehnquist, you're a little liberal for me, but, I can adjust.
But I can make do. Yeah.
So during that clerkship is, some people do clerkships and they're like, okay, great experience and sets them up very well for going into private practice. Some people, it inspires them to be like, that's my goal, is to actually become a judge. And at that point, did you have any sights of no?
No, wasn't on my radar in the least. I did it because I was told it would be a good experience. And the dean at Duke recommended Judge Roney. And he said, don't just paper the country, let's look at judges who are,
Specifically,
whatever.
Right.
And so that
Cool.
was it.
And you obviously did not get the clerkship at
the Supreme Court. The clerkship at the Supremes, unfortunately, I guess, unfortunately. And then I went back to Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, where I had summered during law school. And despite its sweatshop reputation, went back and was very happy at Paul Weiss.
Okay.
And when did computers enter the scenario?
Probably right before I left in '95 to go on the bench. I remember, stories from the past. One of the young associates who was my era, asking if he could have if not either a computer or at least an electric typewriter, so he can do his own word processing, etc. And, as I understand it, big meeting of the partnership, but we can't allow this to happen. We can't have lawyers billing for doing secretarial work. This would be a terrible idea. And, we didn't have PCs in our office or anything like that. If we wanted something done on, a word processing computer, it went down to the word processing center. There were people there indeed 24 hours a day, which was great because if you were able to go home at 6, 7, or 8 o'clock, you submitted your work, and
Next morning came in and
next
done.
There it was.
on the desk, all done. Of course, my problem was there were only a few people down in the pool who could read my writing, because my handwriting is terrible. So I had to make sure, who it got assigned to, which they
Right.
took care of on their own a lot, because, someone who is not one of those would look at it and say, what language is this in?
Right.
Who can handle this? And so it would
Right.
go to somebody capable of reading my writing.
So talk to us about the switch from the firm over to the nomination process and through that. Kind of, first of all, at what point were you like, hey, being a judge, I can do this? Yeah, that's something that is in my wheelhouse. And kind of what the environment was at that point.
At that point, I was a senior associate or of counsel or whatever, was doing an arbitration as a lawyer with one of my senior partners. And at that point, there were fewer people willing to handle American Arbitration Association arbitrations as an arbitrator. And one of the tribunal administrators came in at one of the breaks and went to my senior partner and said, Mr., I won't use his name now, I see you're on our roster, but you haven't taken a case from us in 5 years at least. When can we get you to take a case? And he basically said, I'm much too busy, leave me alone. And I go, hi, I am willing to go on, willing to go on the roster and take a case. And she said, okay, great, I'll put you on the roster. And
Wow.
she did. And the difference between then and now is that was it. I was on the roster, no extra training or
Just
anything.
volunteer. Right, I'll do it.
Now, post 23 years on the bench, I knew I wanted to do some arbitration now that I'm off the bench. And so I went to the AAA and I said, we have to take this 2-day course that we charge X $100 for to get back on the roster. And I'm like, but I was on the roster way back then. And they said that was a different time.
Went on the waiver wire and nobody picked you up. So you gotta reinstitute yourself. Wow.
So you became an arbitrator at what point in your career?
I was,
mid-80s or
yeah, probably maybe even late 80s, probably later 80s. And I thought that was fun.
okay.
And then I had a 9-month jury trial going back to my North Carolina roots, but federal court in Greensboro, North Carolina, Liggett against Brown and Williamson, a below cost pricing Robinson-Patman Act case with a trademark component, the trademark being the closure seal on the black and white packages of generic cigarettes, which were a big thing in the 80s because of the economy then. And while it was a tremendous trial experience, it was 9 months away from home and away from my then 1-year-old son, who I got to see and got to see my wife, but somehow that usually gets forgotten in telling these stories. I got to see, the baby 1 weekend a month, because that was all we had the time to, go back home for.
Did you, when the trial started, did you know it was going to be that long?
Yeah. He predicted and told the judge and the jury 2, maybe 3 months at the outside.
Right.
And, every month or so after that, my senior partner and I would look at each other and said, I think it's time to call the wives and tell them we're not coming home next month, sort of thing.
Just 1 more month. 1 more month.
1 more month. But it was a
man.
phenomenal experience. I mean, I had tried cases before as the number 2 or number 3 on the team, but this was every single day in court. The case And the exhibits at that point were so voluminous and so paper that I talked to my counterpart on the Liggett team, and we agreed and convinced the judge that the case was so big that 2 lawyers per witness instead of the only 1 lawyer can talk during a witness examination would really make things work better. And the judge agreed. So I was on my feet in that trial every single day. It was either my actual witness or my senior partner's witness, and I was the number 2 dealing with the exhibits and whatever, or it was our local counsel's witness, and I was a very strong number 2 to him, because he spoke with the appropriate drawl, and the jury loved him for that.
Of course.
But the case was a little too big for him. But so
And all paper exhibits?
Yeah, all paper.
Wow.
Yeah, and 9 months, and just to show where I have my priorities, I missed 1 day of trial. And that was the day of the annual Baker Street Irregulars Sherlock Holmes birthday.
I thought you were going to say it was my son's birthday or.
Nah, none of that. Well, actually, we got lucky because we started the trial when David was 11 months old. And we got our first break, where the judge said, okay, 3-day weekend, whatever. And so I got to go home for his birthday.
Great.
But otherwise, no, he and Karen were, they were second fiddle to Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
The day I missed trial was for, leaving on a Thursday night after trial to be up in New York for Friday for the annual Sherlock Holmes birthday.
Right. So let me digress.
Home, though, at all? Did you stop at home on that trip?
Yeah, I slept at home.
Well, he had to get his hat and his pipe.
That's true. That's true.
The deerstalker hat and the pipe. So let me digress there just a bit. When did the interest in Sherlock begin?
Sherlock began when I was in school. Which school? Elementary. Had to throw in the elementary line, but somewhere around elementary school or maybe junior high school, I was devouring the Hardy Boy books.
Okay.
And
yep.
The story, as my mother told it, was she figured I got to get some better literature than that. And my good friend Lloyd, who lived across the street, who was a year older, had been going to the library and taking out, James Fenimore Cooper, Charles Dickens, whatever. So she either bribed him or at least suggested to him that he should pass on each library book for me to read after he finished it.
Okay.
And we did that for a while, and at some point he got to the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and he passed it on to me, and I loved it. And I guess I knew or somehow figured out that there were more of these stories. So he is ready to pass on to me the next book he was reading, and I said, "Yeah, forget it. I'm going to go to the library and get the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes or whatever it may be." And I never looked back. And
Wow.
I found a reference somewhere to the fact that the Baker Street Irregulars existed. And I eventually got my courage up and wrote a letter to the head of the Baker Street Irregulars and basically said, "Can I join?" And he was very nice and wrote back and said, "Well, no, you can't join. People are invited to be a member of the Irregulars for service to the cause, but you can subscribe to the Baker Street Journal, which is their quarterly." And he said, "I can tell from your, I don't know, it might have been my handwriting, but it didn't get any better when I was a lawyer." But he deduced that I was young and in high school or college or whatever it was. And he said, "We have some sub-societies of the Baker Street Irregular for junior Sherlockians, and suggested I write to them. And he gave me the addresses. This is all snail mail days.
Wow.
And so I became involved with those organizations and wrote some articles in their magazines. And eventually, in 1970, I got invited to the Baker Street Irregulars dinner, not as a member, but as a guest,
Nice.
which was quite phenomenal. So,
Great.
Wow.
So, quick aside, favorite film portrayal of Sherlock Holmes?
mixed between Basil Rathbone, because I grew up
Right.
with, in
Yep.
New York, WOR Channel 11, playing the black and white Rathbone and Bruce movies, late at night. And that was my introduction to Sherlock in
Sure.
non-print form.
Yeah.
But Jeremy Brett was
Oh,
probably the best Sherlock.
that Masterpiece Theater?
No, he was PBS.
PBS, yes.
Series done, multiple series done by Granada Television in Great Britain and brought to the US on PBS. And, another aside, it almost didn't come to the United States because I was at that point at Paul Weiss representing and what was asked to represent the Doyle estate in a lawsuit.
Oh, I think I've heard you mention this before. Yes.
That had asked for a license to show their series in the US. And then, I don't know, they delayed it for whatever reason. And Jean Conan Doyle, Sir Arthur's daughter and sole surviving child, licensed TV rights for a limited period to another TV producer that made some horrible Sherlock Holmes movies that for TV that fortunately
Will not be mentioned.
were a flop. So ultimately we were able to settle the Granada Jeremy Brett case with them taking a license from Jean Conan Doyle.
Was that like one of the defining moments of your life, getting to meet the members of his family?
Yes. Jean was, she was fairly old by then, but she was delightful. Very British, very, polite and all that, but also, somewhat of a feminist. She was, outraged at the, whatever it is, Army and Navy Club or whatever it is, that because she had been in the military during World War II, she was entitled to be a member, and just because she needed a club, she was a member, but, had to use the woman's door and couldn't go in the main dining room or some things like that. And she was pretty vocal about how ridiculous that was.
Wow. So I want to keep us on track because we are going to quickly run out of time.
Yeah, we're going to do this in 2 hours instead of 1. I understand.
Yeah, exactly. But so, okay. So you finish at Paul Weiss, you move on to the Southern District. Over your career, you obviously there were a number of cases that came before you. I think I want to pick on the one that most of our listeners will obviously know, and that is when your introduction to technology assisted review and the analytics and everything that was going on there. So we're skipping ahead to, this is 2012, I believe, 11, 12?
Early 2012.
Yep. So had before you got to there, where obviously, your mastery of the actual issues, which I think a lot of judges could learn from in terms of as they're looking at technology cases. how had technology played into your cases? How are you dealing already with discovery en masse as electronic data became so much larger and so much more important in general litigation? What was your thought process? Kind of what were you thinking at the time? And when you looked at De Silva, was that something that like you were like, oh, this is something that I can actually make a difference on?
Not quite that, but starting around 2005, 2006, in anticipation of the amendments to the federal rules that introduced the concept of ESI, electronically stored information, I was seeing more and more cases where dealing with email was coming to the fore. And I, remember in a way, as email is now so passe, but how it was so cutting edge then. And right after the rules change, I would be, saying, how are you going to be dealing with email? And lawyers would point to their gray hair or lack of hair and say, Judge, I've been practicing for a million years and I don't understand this computer stuff. What do you want from me? And I sort of had to say, what I want from you is to either learn it or get somebody, younger and more tech literate at your firm to work with you on it, or retire, but
Or go away. Yeah.
throw up your hands and
So,
ignore it.
Before the rules,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but before the rules changed, were people just fumbling and stumbling around that, or do they tend to just ignore it and hope that it would go away? But email, I mean.
To wink at each other. And it was sort of without saying it, but if you don't push for email, I won't push you for it. And let's handle it the old fashioned way.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
And then leading up from there to De Silva, the summer, more than a summer, 6-9 months before, I had already, started my going on the speaking circuit. Or as my wife once said to me when I came home from court and said, I've been invited and accepted to go to Birmingham in August to talk on eDiscovery. And Karen turns to me and says, you do know you can say no sometimes. Okay, but I had been asked to give the keynote at the first Carmel Valley eDiscovery retreat.
Right.
And I said, fine, what do you want me to talk about? Because more often than not, I did panels and, whatever, not a keynote. And they thought for a bit and said, we'd like you to do something about search. And so I did a lot of research about search. I mean, obviously, I was familiar with keywords, having done the William A. Gross decision and followed Judge Facciol and Judge Grimm's decisions on effectively, doing keyword searches. But, so in looking at the literature, I was learning about what we now call TAR. And so I spoke about that, and one or two people who I really respected who were there in the audience. I think Browning Marine was one of them, Chris Dale, George Sosha. 2 or 3 of those guys, maybe all 3 of them, said, not many people know about, and I'm going to call it TAR for simplicity.
Yep, let's keep it to that for now.
You really should write this up and get some publicity on it. So I did, and Monica Bay at what was then Legal Tech News, what was then Law Technology News, now Legal Tech News, was my editor, and I did an article on it called Search Forward. Didn't have the Daily News headline writers to sex it up, so that was it. And then that came out in October of 2011. Right around November, December 2011, purely by random draw, the De Silva Moore case was assigned to me for discovery purposes.
Wow. Okay.
And indeed, I said to the parties when they first walked in, and both sides were talking about doing tar, but they each had different ways they wanted to do it. And so I said to them, perhaps naively or whatever, but gee, you must have thought you died and went to heaven when you were assigned to a judge on this who actually knew about tar.
Right.
No good deed goes unpunished, but we'll leave that part of the story for some other place and time. And so then, by February, the case was at a point where I had to write a decision. So I did.
Cool. Now, how much, in the eDiscovery world, obviously that's the case that, and your influence over search and technology assisted review has been kind of shaped the image of you. In your thought process, how much of when you look back on your tenure as a judge, is that one of the things that actually stands out to you as one of the highlights in terms of, like, when you look back and say, okay, I had an impact on the judiciary, on the practice of law through my 23 years on the bench? Is that something that actually is like one of the highlights, or to you, is it just one of many decisions that you made along the way?
I mean, it's one of hundreds, probably thousands of decisions.
Right. I'm saying the top ones, the ones that stand out to you.
I consider my tar trilogy, De Silva Moore, Rio Tinto, one of my favorite phrases, it is now black letter law, which I use. Tinto, it's now black letter law that if the producing party wants to use tar, courts will allow it. And Hiles against City of New York, that you can't, you can bring a horse to water or whatever, but you can't force a party who doesn't want to use tar. Neither the opposing party nor the court can or should do that. Those and some of my other eDiscovery opinions, and I guess my eDiscovery evangelism, for lack of a better term, by speaking at Legal Tech, by speaking at any number of eDiscovery conferences, Sedona, EDI, Georgetown, et cetera, et cetera. I think that it is part of my legacy, or is very important to me. Although, frankly, I found that I learned quite a bit from attending those conferences, so it was not a one-way street. But anyway.
So, and what was one non-eDiscovery case that kind of sticks in your memory from your time on the bench?
Now I don't even remember the case per se, but it was granting habeas corpus relief to somebody being reversed by the district judge, and then he was reversed by the circuit, reinstating my decision. So, doing good for somebody who was in jail for a very long time that shouldn't have been. But it's important, but I don't remember the name of the person,
right,
case name, or whatever it may be. Some things like that. And, no one in particular, but I loved trials. They weren't as frequent as I would have liked. But, I was sort of a trial attorney, and therefore very much enjoyed, having to make the, split-second decisions of, overruled, sustained, this comes in, it doesn't come in, things like that.
Right.
What was your longest trial on the bench? No 9-month marathons?
No, I would have had one that was supposed to last, I think, 2 or 3 months. And I, knowing that would destroy the rest of my docket. and leave me, catching up for years.
Right.
Said, okay, we are going to make sure it stays at that length and doesn't expand. So I'm giving you a time limit. Each side can have X hours for the trial. And the way I'm going to keep track of it is to use a chess clock on you. Since David, my son, was a chess player in high school, so I knew the chess clocks well, and it worked, and they settled after 4 or 5 days of trial. So
it went away.
right.
Okay, so just in the interest of time, so after you retired from the bench, you joined DLA. What are you up to? I mean, we know that you're super busy, and we really appreciate the time that you're spending with us today. But what occupies your days nowadays in your time at DLA?
I'm doing a little of everything. I'm in the copyright and trademark group. So substantively, those are the cases that I get most involved with for firm clients. I also am one of the firm leaders in eDiscovery, Discovery. And so I am, called in by my colleagues of, we've got this issue, what, should we do? How should we handle it? And even more generally, just, yes, every judge is different, but how do you think a judge you don't know will react to this argument at a discovery conference or on substantive issues? I've brought in a number of cases, not as many as I'd like, where I was hired to be specially discovery counsel, even though they were not smart enough to use DLA for their merits work. They were using another firm, but brought me in for the discovery piece of it and worked very well and seamlessly with their merits counsel. Then switching from sort of the litigation role to the former judge type practice, I'm doing arbitration predominantly for the AAA American Arbitration Association, mediation through various sources, excuse me, and special master work for discovery and keeping cases on schedule. So far with 3 such cases in the commercial division of New York Trial Court, New York Supreme Court. My former colleagues in the Southern District who would know me best and be more likely to hire me, Southern District does not use special masters very much. It's very infrequent, so that doesn't help me.
Right. Do you find that overall, obviously education has played a big part over the last 15 years in terms of eDiscovery? With the younger attorneys now, having, or even now younger partners, I should say, having grown up with technology, and really it's no longer, you can no longer get away with the excuse of, what do you want from me, right? But
except we're seeing that again, not so much based on age, but okay, I can handle email. I've already learned
Slack,
I can handle
Slack, yeah. There was an article this morning about blockchain. Blockchain's going to be the big new dispute area. How do you validate that? How do you get that in? Yeah.
Right. You start talking about things in JSON, and they're like, "Wait, what?" So,
Jason, wasn't he in one of those horror movies?
Something like that. But are you seeing that you have to step in a lot? I mean, that there's a lot of guidance still needed, or do people generally come prepared enough, at least with the understand? They might argue over why they should do it or if they have to do it, but at least they understand what's needed.
I mean, we've got a fairly sophisticated eDiscovery practice at DLA Piper, but it's often helping them deal with the other side that either doesn't know what they're doing or knows exactly what they're doing and is doing it to hide the bad documents or the bad information.
Right. Okay. So I think we need to wrap things up, unfortunately, although there's about 1,000 more questions that I'd love to ask you. So I'm going to ask just one quick random question and then turn it over to Tom to ask the final two. And mine is your favorite movie that you like to quote. Not your favorite movie, but your favorite movie that you like to quote, and what's the quote?
Casablanca.
Ooh, there we go.
I'm shocked. I'm just shocked that there's gambling going on here, or whatever else fits after the I'm shocked. And fortunately, most people with the I'm shocked start know where it's going.
Yep. Nice.
Yep. Great movie.
And it's one of my favorite movies in general.
In general. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Tom?
So I've got one quick one similar to that. Beatles or Stones?
Beatles.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is a constant argument between myself and Tom. And thank you for the judge has ruled.
Yeah, that's it. It's all over. So, I'll have to consider. I'll note my exception and consider taking an appeal.
Yes.
I'm not sure to who, since nobody agrees with me, but
I know we're short on time, but when you say I'm taking an exception, it amazes me that lawyers still do that now.
It just sounds cool.
Right.
It sounds cool. Right.
That practice was never in federal court.
Right.
And to the extent it was in New York State practice, that went away probably before I passed the bar. But
yeah, ago. But it just sounds so good. It's like that scene in A Few Good Men. I strenuously object. Oh, you strenuously object. Well, makes all the difference in the world. Okay, so last question. One we ask everybody: if you could spend a day with anybody from our profession, living or dead, who would that person be, and what would you do with them?
He's not in our profession, and this is cheating. So if you insist, another one, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Ah, there you go. That would be great.
He assisted, in addition to Sherlock Holmes, he assisted in at least 2 criminal cases, the Oscar Slater case and George Adalji, in getting wrongfully convicted or wrongfully arrested people released. So, and then of course,
I did not know that. Interesting.
After we talked about that for 2 minutes, I'd switch over to Sherlock, but otherwise,
what would you do with him?
What would I do with him?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'd have him, sign all of my first editions and things like that, which would increase their value immensely. I'm still waiting for a time machine that only I could use to be able to do that.
Right.
Otherwise, maybe Earl Warren, just because he went from a moderate, maybe even conservative governor of California,
right,
to leading all the liberal reforms in his court, including, getting Brown versus Board of Ed as a unanimous decision.
Yeah.
Could you just see something in today's court convincing, this is important to the American people to be unanimous? Sorry, Chief, 5-4, and you're lucky if you get 5 and not on the 4 side of it.
Yeah,
but that's another story.
Yeah, no, that's a great choice. He's I think often overlooked. So that'd be a great choice. Yeah. Well, Judge, thank you so much for your time, especially around the holidays. I know you're busy all the time, and with the holidays coming up and family duty, now you have to make up for that 9-month trial from your distant past. Right?
But now it's transference. Now it's the grandson.
I was going to say, how's the grandson doing? Everything.
Grandson is terrific, 13-month-old, and I'm totally unbiased, and he is adorable.
Nice.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks again. We do truly appreciate it. Rocky, as always,
Pleasure.
thanks for your time, and we wish everyone a happy holiday season coming up, and hope to see you again sometime on the eDiscovery channel. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Santa Claus, and thank you, Rocky.